Welcome to the Parts Party. I'm Adriana.
And I'm Ella.
And this is your invitation to hang out with us and our beautiful guests as we explore the lived experience of internal family systems. We want to share in our common humanity as humans who have multiple parts within us, so we can show you what it really is to honour this model of therapy in our own lives. This is a place for IFS nerds, therapists, enthusiasts, or just anyone who wants to get to know their parts and their self a little better.
So grab a soft drink for your little ones, a tea for your manager parts, and maybe something fancy for your firefighter parts. Because all parts are welcome. Our guest this episode is Dean Hilton, an individual, couple and family therapist based in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to the Parts Party, Dean. Perhaps you can start by telling us a bit about your work and also you as a human. And feel free to speak for any of your parts, of course.
Well, first of all, that name, that Parts Party, that's a very touching thing to me because I'm not sure where you guys got this from, but Virginia Satir, she was doing parts parties in the 70s. These were like 3 or 4 hour, getting multiple people to represent your part. So in my family therapy training, I came across her work at the same juncture of IFS. So yeah, as soon as I saw your email to reach out to me, I was like, okay, you've got me with the name. So the name's amazing. So I'm happy to be part of the party today.
I didn't know that she had these parts parties. I've been doing a little IFS group recently and doing that sculpting, getting people to just be different parts. It's so powerful
Yeah.
seeing it outside. So that would have been really cool.
Yeah, she was doing reconstructions like similar to Bert with the constellation work. You know, in the 60s and 70s, she was doing this. And if you look at how she was talking about parts, it's got some real flavors, similarities to some protective aspects to it and what's lying deeper down. So she's a guru. I dressed up as her for our final year in family therapy just to really emphasize how much I love. Yeah, she's incredible. She's incredible. Yeah.
Love it.
So your question was a little bit about what I do, my work, and myself. So predominantly individuals and couples, not so much families anymore. Sort of have a cutoff now around 2025, just because I find when I move under a lower age bracket, there's another energy that I have to bring that where I'm at now might change again in the future. But so predominantly individuals, and prior to getting into private practice, I was working in social work type roles in complex care for about a decade or more. So yeah, incredibly fascinated and love working with very complex dynamics. So I like being challenged. Couples work is definitely something that challenges you, to stay have these self qualities that really challenges, which I like.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think now it's not really a job anymore, and I feel that IFS is not really a model for me anymore. I think it's all just, you know, the yoga, the meditation arts, the healing arts that have been such a huge part of my life for over 25, 30 years. It's all just mixed into some beautiful flow that, yeah, it's just how I move through the world, whether it's in work or out of work. It's just the same flow. Yeah.
Lovely.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love what you said about it doesn't feel like a model anymore, because it kind of feels like you learn it as a model and then it just takes it on as an implicit way of engaging with people from that point. You don't have to do the steps. If you just engage with them from that place of self, the steps emerge themselves naturally.
Yeah.
And as you said, it doesn't really feel like work at that point. You just let it kind of
Mm.
follow on and flow on.
Yeah, it's almost like mathematics, is it discovered or created?
Mm.
Totally.
And it's like, are those steps created? It's like it's come from people's experience
Mm.
rather than a group going in analysis to try and figure out how to fix something. So yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful language to help, I reckon. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
It's very playful to see yourself as these different parts rather than this messed up person. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And something you can actually engage with and talk to rather than just going, I'm just a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's real genius in I studied quite a few of all the sort of outside mainstream psych, all the different trauma modalities, EMDRs, DBR, havening. They have incredible literature and profound healing. However, I think as much as IFS is a language to describe the human experience, there is genius, like how you feel towards. If Richard came up with that or whoever came, like that is genius. Like as a process, as a guide, a modality, I think
Mm.
it gives you so much, so much. Yeah.
Magic question.
Mm, mm.
And Dean, outside of this sort of not workspace of living and breathing IFS and yoga and meditation, what else makes up you in your life?
I'm lucky. I was born into a beautiful, beautiful family where my two caregivers, my two parents are still alive and they're friends. The relationship has transformed into a friendship. A long time ago, I think studying family therapy helped even further deepen our relationship. So I'm blessed. I'm really lucky to have that as a foundation in my life. And it's smaller and more, the people who I spend time with, it is smaller and more, I suppose, the time that you have now, the quality of these relationships are so special. They're smaller, but the depth of them is so beautiful. And I combine that with anything that really has movement. I've recently started studying under another master in martial arts, which has been a huge part of my life. I lived in China for a long time, studying under different masters, and it's a huge passion of my life. I practice every day, and it's like being a therapist. You can't master this stuff, and I think that's what draws me to this. And spend a huge amount of time in the non-human world of nature and mountains and bush, and that's the balance of living in it. I live in inner city in Melbourne. The sort of density of the work in combination with my environment. I spend a lot of time heading out into state parks where there's just the nature and no real human interaction. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm.
I'd really love to hear about how you came to IFS, Dean, and what your journey has been like in experiencing yourself as parts rather than just a fixed personality.
I first came across, it was a bit of a life-changing moment. I did this trauma sensitive yoga was just coming out in the early, I think it was like 2012 or something. And so I went there and I learned, so Bessel's work sort of came across. And then a few years later, that book, Body Keeps Its Score, which I think a lot of us first found it through that, and that changed. Yeah, I my mission was to study everything that was in that book, and that's where I first IFS. It seemed like a very creative way, whereas the other ways, EMDR, are very process driven. You can be creative a little bit, but I feel like that was exploring the psyche in a experiential way, which me and my experience with non-dualism and the Indian way of not all practices, but a lot of their practices, the non-dual path of experientialism. I think that's the thing that really, these words that are so limited to our internal experience and external, but internal experience. And from that, Bonnie Weiss, she was the first person to bring IFS out. And I remember rocking up and she had this word self written on the board, and I was like, okay, what? Because of Buddhism and all this word has been used through the history of humans. I was fascinated by this word. Like everything else was okay, but this word was like So I went home and I just remember Googling as much as I could what Richard had written about it. And one of the things that really sort of, I like what he wrote with the description of the ocean, and the ocean being the self and the peaks of the waves being the individuals. And I really like that. It was just that coming from this no self Buddhist, it sort of played with I really pushed her with questions about what they were describing it as. And I had a lot of skeptical and cautious parts of going into, a model from America, like, what is this thing? And I think Simon had organized the first level one. I think it was the next summer or around after that. I think I did 3 workshops, 3 weekends in a row. Really interesting people got drawn to it as well. That was another thing that stood out to me. And that's always a good sign for me, is like who you're surrounded by, who's interested in learning this. And they seem to have come from a very heart space, a very loving. So that instantly, yeah, that really just like made me feel, okay, there's something really beautiful about this. Still really skeptical from a modality point of view, but just the things that Bonnie was doing. Yeah, she was really interested in the body. She was really interested in the somatics as much as it was to want of a better word, a spiritual aspect to this that really drew me, to be honest. That was the main thing.
Mm. And what was it like for you to start kind of engaging with parts of yourself?
Well, doing level one, I remember it so vividly, like doing our triad practices. And it was just this moment of just noticing this sort of like thinking that had been worked on through like CBT, ACT, that was the main experience I'd had as a client, working with different aspects of thought, mainly around how my thinking was playing a role in my life, and getting really stuck in loops and obsessing and really getting fixated on certain patterns in life. And I just remember doing the practice group, and there was just this moment, like I said earlier, the language, this word protector, I think that was a game changer, that word for me. Like that word, I actually feel like a little bit teary in a really loving way, even talking about this, because I just feel that such a transformational, from a conceptual, for intellectual thinking parts, it's such a paradigm shift in understanding maybe what these things are doing. And I remember in this practice group that it was just that sort of like noticing, focusing, sort of fleshing out a little bit. It was just that, like, can't remember the exact question, but it was almost like the sort of how you feel towards, or what are you hoping, what you're trying to do. There's a little bit of a question, but what I did notice, there was just this like real felt sense of compassion, not an intellectual compassion, a real heart. It was only a second or two. It was only like a little bit towards this sort of thinking part. And that was like a glimpse into something that, even speaking about it today, that experience is still with me right now. And it's with me like every day. Not always. What I mean by it's with me every day is it's just that, like we sort of touched on before, it's like there's a way now. Whereas in all the traditions, what I think is such a missing component when you do yoga, qigong, meditation practices, all these practices, usually you're in a class of 30 people and there's one teacher. And it sounds amazing. The teachings sound amazing. It's just that unless you have a guru, a master, a teacher, a guide in front of you, guiding your unique system to these teachings, they just sort of, they get into the intellect, they can go down a little bit, but they just sort of circle around. And there's very much a witnessing of your experience, and how to interact with your experience is missing in a lot of the generalized teaching. So I think for me, being able to interact with it in a direct way have compassion for this part that had been, like through CBT, it's just like it's not just helpful, it's harmful. You're trying to get rid of, or you're trying to manage, or you're trying to dismiss, or you're trying to coach, or you're just, these poor parts that are trying their best to help you. You don't have any experience of that, as in they're trying to protect you or help you. Your experience is this is something that we need to get rid of or push down or get out the way. And I remember some of the CBT things. They used to remember one lady, she used to set up like a recording, and just put it like a loop about a message to sort of, now I understand it. It's like it's trying to engage another part of you to say to this part. And it's horrific to me now, that this is going on still today. And it's like these poor parts need love and care. And it's just like that was the start. That one moment in that practice group was the start for having a really different way. Yeah, a really different way. Yeah.
People connect to their parts in such different ways. I know people starting out as clients or wanting to learn the modality, they often say things like, well, I don't see them or I don't hear them. It all just feels like me. And I know there's so many different ways people experience themselves as a system of parts. What about you, Dean? How do your parts sort of turn up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel one of the tricky things with my system, generally, there's not much imagery. And I think even, what did Richard say? I think he said that there's some stat, a third of the people don't get imagery.
I'm the same. Yeah. No images.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but that's been tricky.
Mm.
That's been tricky to sort of like, sometimes with a therapist, I really have to sort of like work with the therapist in how they're going to work with me.
Mhm.
Speed,
Mm.
great questions. My system really likes is like, um, take as much time as you need because it's not an image straight away to go, oh yeah, I can. It's opaque or it's a little bit vague or it comes in and goes out or it morphs into another sensation.
Mm.
And I've got very strong intellectual. Yeah, I sometimes think when I work with clients, it's like, man, this feels so clean. This feels so smooth. And it's like mine is like I got these intellectual parts that we have to negotiate at the start, go, okay, anything you need to say before we get, and then I've got this real opaque sort of mystical sensation. So I think it's been a really good thing for me as a therapist though, because it's allowed me to, when you do have an imagery, I find that, okay, it can be quite clear internally for people. It's not always the case, but it can be quite easy to interact with. And I think it's been really helpful me in my work to understand that, like you just said, there are so many people experience their internal world and not just statically, that changes too.
Mm. Mhm.
And it can change depending on different things are happening. And I'm a very somatic body work. So I love following okay, so you got some itch in your stomach and following that
Mm.
to a memory, So I think my experience of being very non-imagery has helped my work as well. Yeah, but not so easy as a client. It's been a challenge of setting up the work with the work. There's been a combination of that stuff. Yeah.
And do you have any specific examples? A really helpful but uncomfortable way to know parts is when we're activated or what people would call triggered. In IFS, we call a trailhead, or maybe that situation is a person, what Dick called a tormentor. Do you have any specifics that you'd be willing to share with the audience? A way that sort of a part became known through a trailhead or through a tormentor?
I think, there's a few popping up, but I like sort of following the part that I already sort of discovered because I feel like that part is oh yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like there's a cluster of them because traditionally through I don't use this language or diagnostic language, OCD is what Western psychs define my experience.
Mm.
Some of the IFS stuff is really cool around it. I feel like I've found that my own way. It's just that with those sort of like thinking, scanning, and it can be a little bit firefightery too.
Mm.
You know, this doesn't get mentioned a lot, but thinking parts, which can seem quite managerial, if we're going to go through the traditional, you know, manager, firefighters, exiles, they have a firefighter quality through a managerial process, which is kind of fascinating. And so I feel the one that I discovered, the one that had been, you know, treated with such criticism, really, you know, that's really what unfortunately is happening inside when you go through a CBT, is that these parts internally, and as much as the relationship with the clinician was beautiful, there's even that in it too, right? Externally, so it's internally double whammy. So this part that had been working out, it's got a lot of names, but it doesn't really have one name, but it just gets into a loop of trying to solve a problem. And other parts get recruited in that process. It's just that, yeah, I can feel it. Always in my left side of my head, which is kind of interesting, left brain, right brain. Always in the left side, always you can notice as I'm pointing up to my left. And yeah, it can be like electricity in the speed of it, you know? So trying to, like being blended, it's almost like an intellectual, you know, the seat of I. You're viewing the world through the seat of I, you know, and that is very self-like. So that did my head in when I heard that, right? Like self-like parts. When I first learned IFS, I was like, self-like parts, okay. So like trying to understand that and realizing that I've got a few of these, a few of these guys upstairs, you know, like, so I think stepping back, having space, being unblended from this on a more, like most of the time now, it's just an unblended, and it can come in, it can pop in. It's just one of the things that happened, and which is such an incredible and beautiful thing, is just an overall quietening inside, you know, can still get jammed, can still pick up sort of things. You can get like another part searching and looking and concern. It's just that this part was caught in a cluster of worry, concern, self-like. So becoming aware, becoming connected, and also getting a much, it's hard to put words to this, but, you know, knowing my mother's history through her grandmother that suffered really extensive trauma, you know, mum coming to Australia from England and going into the middle of nowhere, like, and I'm being the firstborn. So you can start to see these worry, knowing that anxiety, I can start to see these themes coming through from a legacy. So there's a real sort of that double whammy, you know, like the legacy of worrying, concerning parts, and then experiencing my own traumas growing up, and then that just being supercharged and running its own. So that's been really a lot of my interest and work, both before IFS and with IFS. And I think it's really important for me to share as well that the body work, and I'm using this word body work, like yoga to some degree, but there's very specialized qigong healing practices that have found their way into some very ancient martial arts. There's three: Jingyi, Tai Chi, and Bagua, and I've studied all of them. And the Jingyi, which I've just started with this teacher in Melbourne, like some of the healing practices, and with my work, the more and more, for me, it's like the reason why the asanas were there is so you can sit, you know. Then the same with Qigong, it's really active, powerful, and then the more you do it, you end up just sitting and you go internally. And I think it's profound for my system having a body practice combined with doing inner psyche healing through parts. I think they're actually, the more and more I grow, the more I do this for myself and others, the more I feel like you could use a lot of different language to describe this. But for me, it's just one, the neurobiology of the physiology is helping the psyche, and the psyche is impacting the neurobiology of the body. So I think just how can we do more of both, I think is really, my system just has an amazing response and interaction by combining them both. Yeah.
So moving to hear. Thank you, Dean, for being so generous with a bit of your own story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. That's no problem. Yeah.
So before you touched a little bit on self and how that word really struck you when you walked into that training.
Mm.
And ultimately, this journey of learning to engage with our parts is about us engaging with them from self and learning how to become self-led rather than being taken over by parts. So I'm wondering if you can speak maybe about how you conceptualize of self and how you've begun to experience that self energy.
Yeah, that word conceptualize, how do I conceptualize self?
It's like a paradox.
Yeah. I also, I never mention that word with my clients. I
Mm.
never talk about self. I never talk about self energy. Self-led, because I do a lot of couples, like sometimes but it's usually after a long process of healing. I let people reflect what their experience is back to me, and then I'll use that language, just to sort of maybe emphasize. And there's quite a few parts around this word self, and one of them is self, self energies, qualities of self. And one thing that I read in my late teens, early 20s around Taoism, and it's, to speak of the Tao is not the Tao.
Mhm.
And the non-dual, I can only speak about what it isn't.
Mm.
And so I sort of have parts that it's almost like, it's interesting. It's almost like to put words to it is somehow, yeah, it's interesting because I hear this a lot in trainings, and I hear other IFS people talk about, there's quite a few people use it a lot. I'm in self energy. Yeah, I'm really in self. Yeah, I just have parts that's like the qualities of self, compassion, curiosity, clarity, like the 8 C's. I love that, this ninth C is getting more choice, is getting more, but these words are words, right? So, joy, openness, peace, the words we use to describe this thing for me are qualities of it, but the thing itself is unnameable and unspeakable. It's
Mm.
purely experiential.
Yeah.
And to put words to it, I have parts that feels like, yeah, it's just, one of the things I remember being in one of the retreats I did is it's like a moment to moment not knowing,
Mm.
wonder. And that's pretty much where I sit with this, the moment to moment not knowing.
I love that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Just sitting in the don't know. Like
Mm.
we get, and being therapists, and hopefully most people, which is not always the case, that are therapists are doing and are really interested in themselves and doing this stuff. And I think that can really activate, learning parts and trying to make sense.
Mhm.
The Taoists used to talk, I'm sure they still do, but they talk about like unlearning.
Mm.
You go up and learn, and then you spend the rest of your life unlearning and shedding. And I feel like yeah, that's such a huge part of my life. It's such a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
I have saved on my phone like a little on the lock screen.
Yeah.
It's a Zen koan that is not knowing is most intimate.
Ah,
And now I kind of want to replace it with a moment to moment not knowing. It's
yeah,
just a beautiful way to phrase it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Moment to moment, not knowing. Yeah.
Mm.
And wonder is in that. Yeah.
Mm.
Like that word's a pretty incredible word if we're going to think about words like wonder. Yeah, it's a special. I think as much as words cause a lot of confusion and disconnection, watching some of those amazing therapists, just using one word at the right time with a lot of space around it can have a reverberation.
Mm.
Yeah, and there are some guiding, definitely in the IFS, a lot of guiding words that can guide us to the experiential in a way that not a lot of other. I think that one of the problems with some of the problems that I found with going really deep in the Chinese and Indian is the language. By the time it's transcribed into English, we're using two or three words to describe one word, and maybe that the person that's translated that has used, and I think a lot gets some of the Tibetan meditation, looking at a thought or connecting to a part, moving towards it.
Mm.
I remember getting taught really early, at the start, it's just like, you want to step back a bit, but then later you want to move towards it,
Mm.
and then using color or light or imagery to transform that.
Mm.
Like that sounds amazing, but it's pretty, I'll speak for myself, it got pretty confusing. It's like there's a lot of mystical and the language and understanding where IFS got pretty clean with their just really clean language. Really helpful for a complex internal system. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I studied Tantra for many
Yeah, yeah,
years
yeah.
and lots of things to focus on and colors and visualizations. And it got very managery trying to kind of reach somewhere. I realized at some point that, yeah, it was taking me away from where I was actually wanting to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, this kind of shift in understanding of, again, doing a podcast talking about IFS and self, but it's something we can't really put words to.
Yeah.
But this experience of engaging with parts from self energy, and even with that kind of idea of moment to moment not knowing, and that cleanness, as you said, of just kind of slowly leaning in or moving towards a part
Mm.
from that space. I'm wondering if the way that you engaged with parts shifted when you kind of engage with it from self or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, I think, what we were sort of talking about is like on the macro or the universal scale of
Mm-hmm.
things, like, yeah, I think that's where I was sort of like that word self.
Yeah, yeah.
I think on the practical, like daily way of being in this human verse is once again that seed of I, where is this thing? Okay, so what is happening and where? Ask the whys to, where they can chill out. And so I think for me, the more you do this, even it's so helpful being a therapist as well as doing this because you're constantly learning. And I think I remember a long time ago what was helpful for me. Somebody said, "There's nobody else behind you. You're like the last one. You are the last one." It's really cool, right? Like you keep going back and keep going. It's like, no, no, no. There's nothing else there. It's just you and the phenomena that's like cruising around. And so that was probably, actually, now that I say that, that's probably one of the most powerful teachings I had when we're understanding self.
Mm.
And then the quality of your experience in relation to your parts, but really just from there's nothing else behind you. It's just you. Oh yeah, I can sense that there, that there. And it's just this like, you can definitely get things behind and around, but it's just this place that's just different and it allows you to interact with what comes up. Not always, because this human thing can be yeah. I think inner city life, the amount of energy that's around, like once again, the body work allows your nervous system to chill out, and then you have more space, so you're able to be calm. And then when these things pop up, it's like, I can see you. And then you can do all sorts of things. Like one of the things I love is like, the before, during, and after. You're about to go to something. Hey guys, we're about to go into this thing right now. Is there any of you, what do you reckon about that? What do you reckon about going into that? Oh, I'm concerned so and so is going to, So you do it before, then you go into the thing, you're interacting, and then it's like, because you've done that prep, there's less sharpness, and then parts come up and you're able to go, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If it's okay, I'll just check in with you. And you don't need to be in Lotus. You can be in the middle of a nightclub and do this, like it's amazing. And then afterwards you check in. So I think for me, it's really the quality of your relationship on the inside is directly proportional to the quality of your relationships to the outside. And that needs daily, not just sitting in, a quiet spot, but as you go through your day, noticing, interacting, talking, sensing. It's interesting being asked this, even as I'm talking, I can sort of feel right now as we're talking, sort of that love or that energy, to call it self energy, that love or curiosity to these parts that protect us and get us through. And I think that's probably it, right? From a practical point of view, it's like, it's not just this cruising through the life, we're collaborating.
Mm.
We're doing it together, sort of thing, It's like that.
Maybe that's the 10th C. Collaborating.
Yeah. That's a great one. Yeah, collaboration. Yeah, it's so cool to actually talk and feel it at the same time. Yeah, it's profound.
Yeah, it really is. We do need to finish up. We could honestly talk for another hour and just
Yeah,
pick your
yeah,
brain with so much pleasure, but we do need to finish
yeah.
up. Did you want to share a quote or a poem or something to finish with that?
I will share something that I'm pretty sure you'll be aware of it, and it's something I knew long before IFS, and I just couldn't believe it when I got into IFS that this thing is so connected to it. And it's by Rumi, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Rumi.
Thank you. I got shivers.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's cool.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Dean. Thank you for gifting some of yourself and your self energy with us and whoever's going to listen to it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great. I didn't even really feel like it was a podcast, so I didn't. No parts really got active at all around that there might be somebody else listening to this.
Yeah.
So that's
Great.
nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. That was so great.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you for being part of the Parts Party with Adriana and Ella. We hope you enjoyed being with us, and we wish you many moments of self-leadership. We'd love your support by liking and subscribing, and we hope to see you next time.